Your headlines with the announcement of the election date today. We delve deeper into social media trends and how they may or may not affect how you vote. Good morning. Hello and welcome to Media and Society. I'm your host, Alicia Jali. Now, this is a show where we take a look at the intersection between the media as well as you, the society. Now, this show would not be complete without your valuable input. So please give us a call on 011 714 0661, alternatively 714 0662. You can use X using the hashtag SABC Media Society. Good morning. Now, concern over online interference during the elections is now an international concern. It affects established democracies, countries in transitions, and even places where freedom of expression are still tightly controlled. The internet, and more specifically social media, are profoundly shifting and reshaping political communication and political campaigning. Well, joining us to discuss this is Mr. Tselane, Executive Chairperson of the Institute of Election Management, Ms. Aasra Bramdeo, Editor, SABC Digital News. William Bird will be joining us after the break from Media Monitoring South Africa. Dr. Oswelled, who is the Senior Lecturer in the Department of Communication and Media at the University of Johannesburg. Kirsten, Cosser, who is a researcher and at the independent fact-checking organization Africa Check, as well as Mr. Tebogo Ditshego here. He is the head of Ditshego Media. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to each and every one of you. Welcome. Let's start here in studio. Terry, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Aasra, good morning.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Hello, Tebogo.
Good morning, Dumela.
Good morning. Dr. Oswelled, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning, Alicia, and good morning to all viewers.
All right. Thank you so much, Doctor, as well as Kirsten. How are you doing this morning? Thank you for joining us.
I'm well, thanks. Lovely to be here.
All right. Okay. All right. So, Tebogo, let's look at this. The date for elections has finally been announced. Have you seen any concerning trends in terms of social media regarding, of course, the elections that are upcoming on the 29th of May?
Yes, I have. And a lot of the trends are not necessarily what you'll see on the trending topics. Mm-hmm. I think we have an issue in terms of voter education, as well as the approach of various political parties in how they communicate their manifestos. If you go to the average South African and you ask them which political party they're going to vote for, majority of them will tell you who they're going to vote for. Mm-hmm. But if you then go and ask them what is in their election manifesto in terms of energy security, infrastructure development, in terms of improving township and rural education, creating universal access to Wi-Fi and data, you know, a lot of them will not be able to tell you what is in the manifesto. Mm-hmm. So you ask yourself, if the majority of South Africans have not read the manifestos of the political parties that they're choosing, what are they voting for?
Absolutely.
Exactly? And that is an issue. So we need to urge South Africans to go to the websites of political parties and analyze, you know, the manifestos. I mean, even if you invite a guest who is running for an election, you need to know their credentials. What education do they have? What is their background? What have they achieved? Mm-hmm. That's very, very important for you to know. Mm-hmm. But when they're invited for interviews, you hardly ever hear them being asked about monetary policy.
True.
What is your approach to monetary policy? How are you going to develop the economy? What do you think of the structure of the economy as well as the sophistication of the economy in terms of the economic complexities? These are the things that we are not discussing, and I think that voter education is going to be key.
Aasra, I mean, do you think, or have you seen anything? We've seen a lot of deepfakes, of course, spreading false information in the media space, particularly social media. But have you seen anything of the sort when it comes to particularly political campaigning, as Tebogo has just said?
You know, I think that is a very good point about
how we access information and what we access. So as users on all of these social media platforms, for example, I think the question we should be asking is, where are we getting our content from? You know, as the SABC, as the public broadcaster, we highly regulated. And you know, it's not just us, it's all news organizations. You know, we go through verification processes. The information that we put out has been largely considered by a number of people. We've looked at checks and balances. We've looked at, you know, is there anything incorrect or correct? All those kinds of things. So we've been through that whole process. But if people are getting their information on the social media platforms, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be doing that, we should then be asking, why are you getting it from where you are getting it?
Absolutely.
You know, am I looking at Alicia and saying, oh, she looks fabulous today, so I'll believe everything she says? Or, you know, should we then say, well, maybe I should follow somebody else because they might have a little bit more. Or maybe I should look at something else. The other thing about it is, you know, on social media, information is specifically targeted. You know, so if you're a friend of a friend of a friend of Terry Tselane, then you might get information about Terry, but not about Aasra.
True.
And we need to be aware of those kinds of things. So what information also is being blocked or is not reaching you that perhaps you need to take responsibility for and to access?
Very interesting aspects there, Babu Terry. I mean, talk to us about that. Do you think that political parties are actually adequately utilizing the power of social media, especially when it comes to reaching the young demographic? I mean, we know we've just had the final voter registration drives, and they were saying that there's a lot of youth apathy, and we were trying to discern as to why the youth are actually not interested in going out to register to vote, and they were just saying, well, nobody's speaking the right language towards us.
Thank you very much for that question. And perhaps one should actually start from where the issue was raised earlier and by Mr. Ditshego, to say that unfortunately going into these elections, voter education has actually been compromised. So both the Commission as well as the political parties and the civil society organizations have not done enough in order to be able to educate people about the electoral process. And this is made worse by the fact that we now have a new system, new electoral system that includes independents. And there are many people who don't understand how the system is going to be operating. They don't understand why all of a sudden they're going to be getting 3 ballot papers instead of 2 ballot papers. What these ballot papers actually signify. You know, so there is a lot of work that needed to have been done through voter education. And unfortunately that, as I've indicated, either largely because of limited resources by both the political parties and the Commission, but there has not been sufficient information dissemination and voter education. So social media therefore becomes an important avenue through which you could also begin to reach to the electorate. And I think that to a large extent major political parties have attempted to use social media, but new parties that are there, you hardly ever see them. They don't really have their footprint in the social media, so we don't even know what they stand for. We don't even know you know, anything about those new entrants to political terrain. But major political parties that have been there, I think to a large extent they've attempted to use social media to try to reach out to the electorate.
Doctor,
yeah.
Okay, let's go to our team's panelists there. Dr. Oswell, I'm not sure if you can hear us now properly. I mean, maybe let's talk about that. We're talking about the issue of content, we're talking about elections, we're talking about social media, as well as the consumers of that information in terms of how they then discern that information or how they receive that information. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think social media are a double-edged sword, really, because while they multiply the voices that are available, while they assure us of diversity in terms of who says what, so that we are moving away from that era of mass communication where particular players had messages that they disseminated to people that used to be the audiences. On the other side, we also need to be mindful of the harms and polarizing effect that can occur on social media. Because when political actors disseminate messages that have got a disinforming intent, there is that capacity of social media to multiply that information, and sometimes that has detrimental effect, not just to peace and calmness in the environment, but also in terms of the democratic choices that people can make. Because sometimes then there is no way of verifying whether the information that they are receiving is accurate or not, which is quite a huge departure from what used to be the case when the information channels were limited to legacy media. So that's the new terrain that we are in, and audiences as well as political players have to shape up, and they have to rethink strategies of communication, and audiences also have to be aware of the various techniques of communication that political actors are deploying on social media.
Kirsten, maybe also just chime in there. I mean, a lot of people are saying when we talk about issues relating to, or even steering conversations towards the regulation of social media, we are then going to have to strike a very fine balance between censoring and of course freedom of speech. What is your take on that? What is research saying? Because if I own a social media account, right, everybody feels or believes that, you know what, I can say whatever I want, I can repost whatever it is that I want. This is my social media page, so nobody should regulate me.
Absolutely, and it is about striking a balance between those two. But I think it's also about educating the public on how social media platforms actually function, right? I completely agree that in this conversation, social media poses huge opportunities and potential threats, right? So there's the opportunity for theoretically anyone being able to reach people and get a message across and disseminate accurate information and really sort of communicate with people beyond a surface level. But of course, that also comes with the threats of inaccurate information. So, for example, in our fact-checking work, we often come across social media users making claims about a politician or a political party. And part of the danger here is, of course, that even if it's false information, it might seem trustworthy because of the particular dynamics of social media. So, for example, if someone you trust or someone with a lot of followers or a big platform is making a claim, you might be more likely to assume that this information is correct and not take that step of actually verifying it for yourself. And of course, on social media as well, whether something is true or false might not actually impact how far it is spread. So sometimes things like things that provoke our emotions, make us angry, for example, make us more likely to share this information, even if it's not true. And so that ends up going far on social media and reaching more people. So it really is this double-edged sword, and it really is going to be about striking that balance and getting all the stakeholders involved in reducing this false information circulation.
Look, Aasra, in terms of, the SABC, obviously, as you've alluded to earlier on, we are regulated by the BCCSA, but you and I were having a conversation yesterday and we were talking about how online complaints can then be referred to the Press Council. Talk to us about those two different mediums.
So in terms of the SABC, I mean, we're traditionally a broadcaster, right? So we fall under Cosser and therefore the rules of the BCCSA in terms of broadcast. In terms of online and online content, for those registered media or news organizations, then, and especially in terms of social media content, that falls under the Press Council. So, if SABC News, for example, were to publish fake news on our news website, the complaint, or should I say on our social media pages,
Yes.
the complaint then would actually fall under the auspices of the Press Council, as opposed to if we were to broadcast, say something wrong on this program,
On this
right?
program, yes.
So that is the the first thing. But then once again, that is for news organizations who are members, right? The problem is that there are millions of people who are not regulated in any way.
That's true.
So I can go on, and do just about anything on any of my social media profiles, as long as I'm not breaching any of their rules, their community rules.
True.
I'm perfectly fine. I can say anything. I can publish pictures on social media.
Repost content
Exactly.
without any consequences,
Exactly, or very little consequences. I think there have been instances where there have been complaints, complaints to the Human Rights Commission, that kind of thing, that have been dealt with and that have been followed up. But I think also, Alicia, we speak about educating people, but I think we're also at the stage where as citizens, we need to take responsibility for ourselves. We can't complain about the results of an election if we don't vote.
True.
Right? If we don't register, we can't vote, right?
Yeah.
So in a similar vein, if we don't take the responsibility to make ourselves aware, to ask these questions, then some of that responsibility has to be on ourselves. For the SABC, I think, and for other news organizations, we're doing a lot to kind of monitor what we put out, to make certain that what we put out is credible. We're for example part of the Africa-Czech collaboration. We work very closely with the IEC. We have our own complaints mechanism, generally and more especially so during elections. So, if anyone finds complaints about the content that we are sharing, there are many avenues available, but that still doesn't solve the problem of you and me on social media posting things that there are no regulations for.
That's true, Aasra, and I know you're leaving us at the end of this segment, but let's talk about that. Maybe talk to us about some of the programs, election drives that are educational, especially as the SABC, as we head towards elections.
So you mean specifically in terms of social media,
yes.
Right? So we, like I said, at SABC News generally have a number of different platforms, Alicia. In the hundreds, right?
Yes.
So it's very difficult to monitor all those platforms. But suffice to say that there are controls and mechanisms in place that when you put out SABC News content, that it has been through an editing process. That more than one person has checked the content. That it has been verified through standard journalistic kind of ethical standards, right?
Yes.
So, I'm not saying that we're perfect.
Listen, Aasra, and I want to jump in there because we were talking about AI. We recently fell scam to a lot of our anchors. They were using, their faces, their voices, and the content was actually not coming from SABC.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about that. How are we currently dealing with that, specifically around this time of elections?
So it is a huge battle for us.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our anchors have seen that. I think also our audiences have been impacted by that. People have been calling and saying, I have all this money to invest. My response is invested in the SABC. But exactly, you see something come up on your feed. It is, it is branded.
And it's algorithms, right,
yes,
Aasra?
Exactly. So, you watch SABC content on a social media platform, you get targeted with advertising that specifically, you see anchors, you see Sakina Kamwendo, you see Leanne Manis, and then you realize, wait a minute, you have to ask these questions. Why would they be talking about, selling a product? We have to become discerning in terms of how we interact with this, because it is even for an organization as large as the SABC, it's very, very difficult to control. It's not like an advertiser goes to YouTube or Facebook and says, listen, here's my money, I'm going to put up a picture of whoever. It doesn't work like that because everything happens online. There's no way to identify anybody really. Some of these companies are entirely fake.
True.
So there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes, but I think it is a challenge in terms of how we deal with it.
Very interesting indeed. Let's go to the callers. We've got Wandile from the Eastern Cape. Wandile, thank you so much for staying on the line. A very good morning to you. Please go ahead with your comments, sir.
A very good morning, and your guest.
Good morning, Wandile.
I think there is a problem which is currently taking place in terms of social media. One, I'm living in the Bundu areas, in rural areas in the Eastern Cape. The young people are not registered to vote. Secondly, in terms of voter education, it will be a futile exercise at this time of the year as we are approaching the national elections in the next few months. Because when you are talking about voter education, it was supposed to be the responsibility of the political parties, the civil society, and including the IEC. But I think the resources plays a vital role in terms of getting that particular information to the crowd. Some of those young people are not registered. As I was speaking yesterday, one of the young person who graduated last year, that she is seeking jobs. I asked one question: have you registered to vote? She said, the voter registration is still continuing or still open. I said it was closed long time ago, so we have not to have an opportunity to take part and parcel in the elections for this year. So these are the people who are not registered to vote, and in terms of budget allocation for this government next year, they will not be counted for. So I think the media and political parties and civil society should take their responsibility and should shoulder the blame. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wandile from the Eastern Cape. And Terry, I guess I really need to get your comment there, because a lot of people are asking who is it incumbent upon to dish out that political education? Is it the political parties, or is it the IEC or electoral bodies? So talk to us about that, particularly when it relates to social media.
Well, the electoral process is a joint responsibility. It's a joint responsibility between various players. The Electoral Commission, their role obviously is to manage the elections, but also to make sure that the electorate is educated about that process. Political parties also, because they've got to canvass for support, they've got to make sure that their supporters understand the electoral processes. And the media plays a very important role in terms of dissemination of information. The majority of people get information about the electoral process from the media, whether it be television, radio, or even the print media. So it is important that all these players play their role in terms of educating people about the electoral process, and also includes a myriad of civil society organizations that we have. Those organizations also, they've got to make sure that they help to complement what the Commission is doing, what the political parties are doing, to make sure that people are educated about the process of elections.
Absolutely.
So whatever platforms that they're using, being social media or traditional methods of reaching out to the electorate, all those platforms have got to be used because they complement each other. You can't just rely on one platform to try to disseminate information.
Ezra, I'm about to let you go. I know they're going to kill me very quickly though, but I just want to understand, the call from, of course, I know you at the launch of the principles and guidelines of the digital as well as social media usage in election setting, but the call there, I suppose, is we need more verification portals. So how do people then decide? Is SABC currently at a stage where people can say, you know what, I saw this ad online, it has an SABC logo, but I just want to verify if it's actually the correct information?
Absolutely. So, if you go to our website, for example, we have an information complaints input form that anyone can fill in, and we respond to that. The SABC has a complaints at sabc.co.za address. They also have a telephone number that I don't know by heart. And over elections specifically, we set up an elections complaints desk, which we're in the process of doing right now. And obviously then we will share that information as well. So if there is anything, complaints about election-related content, they speed it up, they handled, much more quickly, etc. And I think Kirsten could also talk about, some of the initiatives, and the IEC is also working on an initiative with the MMA in order to deal specifically with social media complaints. So I think there's quite a lot going on.
Oh, thank you so much, Aasra, for joining us. Aasra Bramdeo, the editor, SABC Digital News. We're going to say goodbye to you. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a quick ad break. We'll be back with Media and Society. Do stay with us. This is Media and Society. Welcome back. Now, in the last decade, social media has transformed the very nature of elections and campaigning. In short, social media creates a space for voters to interact with elections in ways that would have been impossible almost a decade ago. So how is this year's election any different from the past election? Well, still joining us to discuss is Tselane, Executive Chairperson of the Institute of Election Management. We've just bid farewell to Aasra Bramdeo, who's the editor of SABC Digital News. We have welcomed Mr. William Bird from Media Monitoring South Africa. We still have Dr. Oswelled, who's the senior lecturer in the Department of Communication and Media at the University of Johannesburg, alongside Kirsten, Cosser, the researcher at the independent fact-checking organization Africa Check, as well as Mr. Tebogo Ditshego, who is the head of Ditshego Media. So, William, welcome. A very good morning to you. Now, you attended, of course, the launch of the principles and guidelines of digital as well as social media usage setting. Look, a call for a binding document as well as a policy, a clear policy on social media usage. You also stated the importance of harnessing the good side of social media and also minimizing the bad side. Talk to us about that.
So we know that there's a lot of bad things about social media, but there are also incredibly positive things. We've been able to learn about political parties, and people can learn about parties, provided they have access to the internet, of course, through social media. There are ways that you can share news and information now that you couldn't possibly before social media. And it's necessitated a change in the way that news and journalism organizations operate, right? They used to be the ones that would break the story. Now it's broken on social media.
Yeah.
And you then rely on journalists and news organizations to verify and help us understand that particular event or series of events. So that's one of the very positive things. Of course, bad actors have then caught on to the power of this. And necessarily, because they are driven by profits, what they tend to do is they reward bad actions. They reward the spread of mis and disinformation.
By how many clicks and likes you actually garner.
Exactly.
Yes.
So the more sensational, the more dramatic, if your post creates anxiety, all those sorts of things, it's going to go viral a lot faster than certainly a boring manifesto launched from a political party. Have a punch-up in the parliament or in the news event of the day.
It's going to be all
That'll
over.
be the thing that people will focus on, as opposed to understanding what are the very serious issues they were trying to deal with. Now, there's certainly a news level at which watching, politicians punch each other as opposed to listening to them drone on and on is might be more enticing. But you have to look at what's the democratic value for that as we head to elections, and that again highlights why you need critical entities like the public broadcaster to be able to say, well, this is the things, these are the issues that you shouldn't be knowing about, and we present them for you. Decide, choose whatever you like, and then you've still got your social media operating, outside and alongside that, so that people hopefully can make an informed choice. Because I guess that's fundamentally the goal, right?
Yes, absolutely. Kirsten, maybe just jump in there as well on the back of what Aasra said. Interestingly enough, and I know you all know about it. I mean, on X, Kirsten, there is, I think it's an account that actually checks information. If you say, for example, post a picture and say this happened in South Africa, and it will say, no, this actually took place like 5 years ago. So talk to us about why we can't have that level of verification, particularly when it comes to issues that we're dealing with here in the country, and particularly around elections.
Yeah, I think that's a particularly tricky issue, and those sort of automatic verification processes are a little bit controversial and difficult to enforce. And I think here I just want to jump in and talk about an alternative to that, or in addition to that, is really collaborative efforts across stakeholders. So Africa Check recently formed a media coalition that aims to help voters critically engage with information, and so ultimately, make informed decisions at the voter booth. And we're doing this by working with news media and civil society organizations across mediums, right? And I think that's really important, social media, but also using online and print news, radio, and TV. And so leading up to the elections, this coalition is working to fact-check claims made by political parties, provide voters with reliable, non-partisan information on issues that matter to them, and then also equip the public with skills they need to identify false information around elections. And I think this kind of collaboration is really the key to combating this scourge of false information that we are seeing already and will see leading up to the elections.
Dr. Oswald, maybe also, weigh in there. What do you think is still outstanding, particularly with political parties, with the media houses, in terms of, being part of the digital rise, and also just making sure that, it's our personal responsibility? Everybody was saying that it is, the onus of the user to ensure that whatever content that you consume, you verify and check.
Yes, indeed. I know a lot has been said about the bad or the evil side of social media, but the platforms in themselves don't have anything wrong. They are just a platform of communication, like any other platforms of communication that we have known. And this phenomenon of misinformation and disinformation has always existed, even before the advent of social media. So I think it's about how people appropriate these technologies, how people use these technologies. And by people, I mean both political actors and the ordinary people. So there is need for more awareness, for more awareness for those political actors, as well as the ordinary users of these platforms, so that they are able to determine what information is accurate, what information deserves to be shared in their networks, and things like that, so that we don't see social media platforms as an evil, but maybe as a complementary tool for the dissemination of information.
What do you want to say to that, Tebogo?
Well, my observation is that people do engage critically with content on social media. They challenge information when they see it. But I think we need to get a little bit more deep. I agree with the analysis that we need a collaborative approach. So we need various stakeholders to come together. We need to move away from this situation where people just hold press conferences and then they say whatever they want and they're not being challenged on anything that they say.
Yeah.
And then someone else will be launching a manifesto every week. 1 week, you have a former president who says that the elections were being rigged. How could they be rigged while you were once a president? What are you saying about the legitimacy of your own presidency? That is, we need critical analysis of things that we're saying. But what is worrying is that this former president says this, but people are not saying anything about it. You only had one political party that came out and said, no, you've got observers, at electoral stations. South Africa has a very robust electoral process. And that process, you'll even see it in campuses when they do their SRC elections. But it's more robust when it comes to the IEC. You're going to have observers there. And you're not the only political party that's going to have observers. All of your political parties are allowed to have observers, and this, it's unacceptable. Misinformation is very dangerous. You can create a lot of instability with your misinformation. There's other political parties that talk about Cape independence. Now, how ridiculous is that? How are you going to get a 2/3 majority when firstly the governing party and the opposition party say we don't support that? And that is, bordering on treason. I mean, how do you say that we want Cape, the Western Cape, to be independent, but you're not being challenged? The security cluster needs to challenge such assertions because they are very dangerous. Assertions such as, if you come from another province and you go into the Western Cape, you're a refugee, you're an economic refugee. And then there's other assertions in terms of xenophobia, where we are demonizing other people from other African countries, forgetting about the fact that our success is going to rely a lot on the success of other African countries. Because if our neighbors are not succeeding, they're all going to be coming into South Africa, and when they come into South Africa, they may not be coming with skills because the systems that they're working in are not working. They're not getting quality education. They're not getting the resources that we need. So we need our neighbors to succeed. We can't be demonizing our neighbors. And you look at, also when you're looking at political parties, you need to ask them about intra-Africa trade. How are you going to enable intra-Africa trade? Because it is so low. There is no country in the world that is succeeding without trade amongst their neighbors. Their neighbors need to be their strong trade partners. They need to succeed, and they need to do well. And that is a part of voter education.
William, what do you want to say to that? I mean, I suppose there's so much that as an individual and a responsible user that I need to personally, be liable for. As Tebogo is saying, that we need to fact check these things and challenge all these things. But I suppose it's a targeted audience for, the information that is actually, or the content that is put out there. It's actually targeted for certain people.
It is, and I think the other element we haven't yet touched on is the fact that you've got this explosion of mis and disinformation, and you've had a concomitant significant decrease of the number of journalists. Even now, more and more newsrooms are cutting journalists from their entity. So you've got fewer and fewer people expected to report on more and more.
True.
You've got an explosion of political parties to expect organizations that have got even less journalists to then go through and ask those. You then need journalists that have got decades of experience to ask those kinds of questions. So it's not to say that we don't have excellent journalists, because we do, but you can't expect that small group of them to do that. So this is a real problem and a threat for democracy, not just for South Africa, but globally, right? That you've got a threat to journalism and the inability for journalists to then be able to go and probe. Because the moment they start to ask too many difficult questions, they get tend to be branded by those as spreading fake news.
Yeah.
It's exactly what Donald Trump has done
biased.
to media in news organizations in the States, which is why, again, you need strong public broadcaster, strong public interest content media, and journalists that are able to do their jobs. You've got to find mechanisms for them to be sustainable. This is a long-term thing. Immediately now, what we need is for everyone, NGOs, etc., to be doing what they can to be encouraging media to do better. We monitor the media. We are monitoring the SABC for in the run-up to elections. We're monitoring social media. You've got to be able to start to see how people are reporting and expose when they do and they fail to ask the obvious question. Many of those that Tebogo has just highlighted, right? When someone says something that's fundamentally outrageous or that's patently ridiculous, you have to ask the question that says, but hang on a moment, weren't you in power then? Or didn't this happen under your watch? Or why do you say that, and where's the actual evidence you have to support this, right? So that's why you need organizations like Africa Check and ours and all sorts of others to be analyzing and be able to challenge these things. But it's only going to work if we all try and combat the dark forces together.
Absolutely. Terry, I mean, you were also at the principles and guidelines setting. Talk to us about the guidelines that were encouraged by the African electoral bodies to develop that clear as well as comprehensive plan for responsible media usage. Talk to us about some of those proposals that were tabled there.
Let me put it this way, that we can't always demonize social media. Social media has got some positive aspects that it plays in terms of information dissemination.
Yes, there's the good and the bad.
Absolutely. So the guidelines were basically trying to deal with a problem that already exists, which is that of disinformation and misinformation. What are the kind of the mechanisms that we can actually put in place in order to be able to deal with those kind of difficulties and challenges? And then one of the things that is being recommended is that there's got to be a regulation of some sort by various countries But that regulation is going to take time.
Yeah.
And you also have got to be very careful that you don't really end up with censorship, because you can try to put mechanism in place, but at the same time do not suppress the capacity of people to communicate and to communicate things that would actually enlighten the society. So the guidelines are aimed at trying to deal with the issues of disinformation. They will be relying a lot on each commission, each country putting in some kind of regulation, but that regulation has got to take into consideration the fact that there are quite a number of other important aspects that cannot actually be violated.
Look, Kirsten, talk to us about that. I mean, I know that there's also been a call for the tech companies, right, they've been asked, right, or campaigned to actually respond quicker when there's content that is, misinformation or disinformation in terms of taking down that post or, of course, banning that specific account, because at this stage, they're taking quite a while to deal with some of the content that is there. So talk to us about those conversations. How far are we in terms of research, and how are these tech companies actually warming up to the idea of responding to this call?
Yeah, I think there's a variation of responses and effectiveness of responses in terms of social media platforms. I think they could all do better. I think they could all do more and take that responsibility more seriously. But also, I think also it's up to politicians and political parties taking the responsibility to not share false information and set the record straight actually on social media when there's false information going around. But yes, absolutely, platforms need to do more.
Look, Dr. Oswald, I mean, talk to us about that. What do you think is the future then of political campaigning and electioneering when it actually comes to the future of media, particularly social media?
I think the future is now, because 10 years ago, I don't think we would be having these conversations that we are having of how misinformation and disinformation is going viral. And it's because of this new entity, this new kid on the block, which is social media. So political parties need to shape up. I know political spokespersons of political parties, for example, need to reskill, need to know how to repurpose their communication, because now the messages that you will put in a newspaper or on a television station may need to be repurposed when you are dealing with social media platforms. I've noticed, for example, that parties have lately taken up to TikTok, which is one of the latest platforms in terms of the social media terrain. And they are using this particularly for visual spectacle, for optics, because they've realized that the younger demographic is attracted to those issues and to those short videos and ephemeral moments. So I think it's high time that political players also attune their communication strategies to these social media platforms.
Tebogo, but how can political parties then, can they be trusted rather to actually, implement these regulatory measures without obviously being biased as well as being objective?
Yeah, if we hold them accountable. You see, what's important, as Mr. Tselane said something very important, is that we shouldn't regulate social media to a point where there's no freedom of speech.
True.
And with freedom of speech is also the freedom to be inaccurate. Sometimes you believe something, but it's inaccurate. You haven't done your homework. Now, when you're inaccurate, you must be held accountable. That's why we need stakeholders to listen to what people are saying. And if it's misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, challenge them. Let's have the debate on social media. So I think in that regard, if we hold them accountable, yes, they can be trusted if we hold them accountable.
In closing remarks, William, how can we hold them, accountable then? I mean, it's a highly charged environment. Everybody wants to get those likes, as we've discussed. So can we trust them?
I don't think we can trust political parties, no. I mean, I think that's a global phenomenon. No one should, you know. They're out there to try and woo us at the moment, and they'll say just about anything. What we do need to do is make sure that they, as Tebogo says, that we do hold them accountable to the extent that we can. The IEC, they have to abide by the electoral code of conduct, and we need to make sure that we can identify instances if and when they don't. If people see things on social media that they are not sure about, they can report it. It's on the IEC's website to Real 411. It goes through, it gets assessed. Content can be removed if it's considered to be, you know, deeply problematic. So there are things that are being done. We've got one of the finest electoral management bodies anywhere in the world running these elections. We need to repeat that, make sure people see that, so that it's not just this thing of, oh, the elections are rigged and this is an easy thing to do. It isn't, right?
Thank you.
We need to make sure that people see and value our democracy and hold our political parties accountable.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Of course, Mr. William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa, Dr. Oswelled, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Communication and Media at the University of Johannesburg, and Kirsten, Cosser, researcher at the independent fact-checking organization and Africa Check, as well as Tebogo Ditshego, head of Ditshego Media, as well as Mr. Tselane, who is the executive chairperson of the Institute of Election Management. Gentlemen, and you, Kirsten, thank you so much for your input, and thank you at home for watching our show, Media and Society. We hope that you will join us again at the same time and same place next week. Remember to keep fact-checking. That is what you should take away from this conversation. From myself and the rest of the team and my panelists, have yourself a great Sunday further. Goodbye.